All right, folks, thank you and welcome. This is part of our series on the shoulders of Changemakers. And today we have two very special guests to help us get through this conversation discussing systemic oppression. And we have several other series, but I absolutely wanted to make sure I did this topic because this is a topic that is near and dear to me, as well as many folks in the CREC agency. Quick introduction, my name is Dana Turnquest. I'm the Student Affairs Coordinator for all of the CREC magnet schools. And roughly what that means is all of the culture and climate, as well as most of the restorative practices for the district kind of flow through my department. So again, this work is near and dear to what I do professionally and personally. And we have two very special guests. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. I'm going to do ladies first, of course. So Ms. Joelle, can you please introduce folks and tell them this also? I want you to tell them a little bit about how you got into this work, what you're currently doing, and then where you're going with some of this work. And then I'll have David do the same thing. But please take this time, shine a light on yourselves, kind of brag on what you're doing if you don't mind.
Thank you so much, Dana, for the opportunity to participate in this conversation. I'm very much looking forward to it. My name is Joelle Murchinson. I'm the principal and founder of ExecMommy Group. It is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting firm that seeks to support organizations on their quest to integrate DEI as a competitive advantage for their organization. What does all that mean? Well, I've spent most of my career in organizations and roles that have put me squarely in the position to support individuals from a variety of different constituencies to gain access to opportunity within the organization. So whether I was in higher ed and I had the opportunity to partner with students to help them reach their potential, or my colleagues to allow for them to really sort of climb the ladder, if you will, to recruit individuals from outside of the organization when I worked in corporate, to partner with leaders within organizations to help them uncover potential barriers to success as it related to not always having the right voices at the table, and really understanding how embracing the voices of individuals who are different from those who typically have been at the table really, in fact, is an opportunity for companies to leverage their desired outcomes, right? This is not standalone work. This is work that is really deeply embedded in, quite frankly, how well an organization is able to accomplish its desired goals. So how I got into this space really is a little bit by accident. I went to undergrad fully expecting to go to law school, and encountered a dean who actually was a brother who had gone to law school. And I went in, fresh out the gate, freshman year, I want to go to law school. And he basically was like, pump your brakes, come back junior year and we can talk about it. So junior year, I come back and, I'm ready. I'm going to apply to law school. And he said, well, why do you want to go to law school? Do you want to be a litigator? I said, no. You want to be a judge? Corporate law? Nope. He said, well, why do you want to go to law school? I said, I want to know the law because I want to be able to make sure that that we don't get taken advantage of, right? And what I've seen in the history of this country is that, individuals get taken advantage of. And my real interest at the time was around educational equity. I grew up in Long Island, New York, in a school district that was literally 50-50 Black and white. You could count the number of Asian American or Latino folks on one hand. And I saw firsthand, particularly being in a district that was, I would say, working to middle class, how different the resources that we had access to were from the district that was just next to us, that had a much more upper middle class population. And early on as a child, and literally in middle school, when we had to walk door to door and beg people to vote yes for the school budget so that we would have textbooks and field trips and things of that nature, I understood at that point in time exactly what inequity meant. It meant that because of where my parents chose to work, the kind of house that my parents could afford to own, that was determining the kinds of education and resources that I had available to me. And I just didn't think that was fair.
Absolutely.
So I really began to think about what that would mean and how I could change the world. So, going back to the whole dean situation, he convinced me that there was no reason for me to spend $100,000 to go to law school. He said, go get a book, Law School for Dummies, and, do what you want to do around education.
I
So I
like
went to
this guy.
grad school. Yeah, I mean, Dean Perry Ashley, never forget him. I went to grad school for education with one of the most foremost scholars around desegregation and public school inequity and how that impacted. I mean, interestingly enough, that I ended up in Hartford because it was a case study. The Sheff versus O'Neill case at the time
Absolutely.
was really, sort of at the beginning. And you all know that, in terms of how the magnet schools are created, that it really is on the heels of that work. So that's what I went to school to study. And then ultimately, we went through a government shutdown. The positions that I had offered in Washington, D.C. no longer paid, and coming out of graduate school, that just was not realistic. So a friend said, hey, have you ever considered higher ed? I hadn't, although I looked to mentors that I had like Dean Ashley and like Karen McLaurin, who really, blazed the trail for me. And I applied for a position at Wesleyan University as the assistant to the dean of the college for students of color. And that started my formal professional career in the DEI space. And that's also how I got to Connecticut. I moved from higher ed into the nonprofit sector. I worked for Inroads, supporting students in getting career opportunities in corporate America. Ultimately, I moved into corporate America, where I swore that I never would work in a position at United Technologies, and then ultimately as the Chief Diversity Officer at Travelers, where I was for a decade.
Wow.
I then was the inaugural Chief Diversity Officer at the University of Connecticut. And after spending a few years there, I started to teach at UConn School of Business and started my own consulting firm, really leveraging my career across all of those sectors and supporting organizations, whether nonprofit, for-profit, higher ed, municipal, and really accomplishing their desired outcomes around DEI. So that's how I got where I am. It was
Wow.
not my intent. I do feel like there's a thread that runs through that is about, really providing access and ensuring that there are voices at the table that haven't always been represented.
Wow. Well, you're hired. I don't know if anyone is looking, but that was everything right there. So thank you for that. And being in New York, I totally understand, how that whole environment can shape your mind in that way and make you want to make some changes out there also. So David, listen, that's a heck of a start. And the same question goes to you, past, present, future. How'd you get here? Tell folks what you got going on now that's special about you and your role with the Urban League, and where do you see some of this stuff going?
Well, I'm actually fanning over here because I heard Joelle's story, seen her name, never saw her face, and really didn't connect the three until in this moment. So I'm like, this is her. That's her. So I'm enjoying the story. I wanted to keep talking. So thank you for that, Joelle. It's an honor to be on this panel and this discussion with you, and I'll try to contribute and not just stand and watch like people do with Michael Jordan and just watch him play. So I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. Classic Baltimore has been documented as one of the perpetual cities for the worst of every stat. Worst crime, worst schools, teenage pregnancy, HIV, all those things, and my mother was a teenage mother, again, with two sons, and so I had to kind of grow up in some challenging environment, right? I mean, like sharing clothes with my brother and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it was tough growing up, and so education was going to be the path forward for us, my brother and I, and so we were student athletes, and so we went to college and played football, and that was our ticket And then, we leveraged that to do more. My brother's a physician now, and but every time my mother introduces me to her friends, they always say, "You the doctor?" And we're both like, "No, no, no." And they're like, "Oh, okay, okay." So I had to try to explain or figure out how to make a difference in my story to my brothers. But I went to graduate school and got my MBA at Wharton, and really had a professional career that I thought would lead me to a path in the role of a CIO or COO. And but along the way, throughout my career, I was always volunteering, doing things like Habitat for Humanity or doing something to give back to the community that I felt like I came from, and giving to the people who had similar experiences that I did. And over time, I just felt like after graduate school, I was working at a bank and doing banking stuff and on some path, and just was not feeling fulfilled, and discovered the community development banking world, where I had no idea existed. I would see pictures of people taking um, photos with people of color or in poor communities, and just felt like they were, um, exploiting poverty in a way to try to promote the bank's mission. And then realized there was a whole business behind it, and the business was relatively robust as well. And so I shifted gears and decided to go into community development banking and manage the bank's markets in Western Pennsylvania, Eastern Ohio, and West Virginia. And over time, just started feeling again increasingly like I wasn't doing enough, or it wasn't as fulfilling, like something was missing. And in turn, I also was struggling because I had, graduate school loan debt, 4 kids, 3 girls. So I'm like, 4 colleges, 3 weddings. This isn't going to add up. At some point, something's going to have to give. And so I'm just trying to figure it out. And I transitioned to corporate banking, where the projects and the investments and the deals are much bigger. And I did that for a while, and that still didn't do it for me, because I was in corporate bank and public finance and working with large institutions. But I ended up talking to 2 mentors, and one of them said, "Well, David, I hate to tell you this, but you're probably a nonprofit guy." And I was like, "Nah, because I can't afford to be a nonprofit guy." So he said, "No, I mean, think about it. You find your greatest fulfillment working in the community, getting hands-on, and you're not feeling valuable or like you're contributing in the role you've had, roles you've had." And then another mentor said something to me that was profound. I probably tell the story too many times. He said, "Well, David, the fact of the matter is, the poor you will have with you always." I was like, I don't think I'm not sure that's what that scripture really means, but I got his point, is that there's always work to be done. No matter how much we do, no matter how much we give, no matter how much we sacrifice, there's always going to be work that needs to be done. And then when I heard those 2 things, I thought, well, I mean, I'll just spend a lifetime trying to do my part. So I transitioned from the bank, did some independent consulting, and worked directly with nonprofit, small businesses, civic organizations, to try to make a difference. And then I got called by a friend who invited me to be his number 2 for a community health organization. And what was interesting about this role is that this community health center was the largest in Western Pennsylvania, but it served entirely the Black community. It was in all of the poor Black communities in the Mon Valley, in the Hill District, and so forth. And I was working directly with Black people, and it was different than the bank, where it was low and moderate income or underserved or things like that. I mean, it was very direct services, and I felt so much more fulfilled and in place. And then unfortunately, he had been ill, and he passed away 3 months after I started the job. And so while I was kind of slated to be the CEO of the organization, it happened 3 months into the role. And so I became an executive manager, which I thought I could do anyway, but it was going to be time for me to prove it. And I did. That role was very pivotal, because again, of those last 2 points that I made. It was also pivotal though, because I realized the reality of nonprofits is that you typically work with board of directors, and at some point, you and the board are either going to continue to work well together or you're not. And so your vision and strategy often kind of conflict, particularly when someone new comes in and brings a new vision in. And so I'll say I lost that battle, and then I was looking for work, and I got a call about an opportunity in Connecticut to be with the Urban League, and I was excited because I thought the Urban League would bring together all of my experiences that included financial management, community development, community impact, health equity, social justice, collaborative partnerships in public-private work, and so the Urban League checked all the boxes and gave me an opportunity to continue at the same level that I've been working in before, and it's been phenomenal. Hartford has been fantastic as someone who's relocated a couple of different times. I never envisioned working in New England, didn't know anybody in Hartford, didn't even know the Urban League movement as well at the time, but grew to realize that, education, employment, housing, health, and of course, social justice are essentially the keys to economic mobility for Black Americans. And once we can achieve those things, then, the world is ours. So that's really what we're doing now is taking this organization and trying to be what people expect and need for the Urban League to be in Greater Hartford.
Okay, excellent. Wow. All right. So kind of a cool merging of systems on this call. We got the educational system, we got the finance person here, which is a whole other system of oppression. And then we got someone who was headfirst into being into the legal part of this systematic issue, talking about systemic oppression. And what I want to do, and we have folks from outside of New England. I grew up in New York. We got Long Island, LI, we got Bmore, Baltimore in the house. And now we're all here on this call talking about systemic oppression and some of the work that's going on right here in the Greater Hartford area. From your backgrounds and from where you guys, your wheelhouse, again, legal, finance, what's some of the most critical pieces that are important for folks to understand, and with some of the stuff that you're doing around systemic oppression, right? Because you got the DEI lens, you got the community, Greater Hartford, the Urban League lens. But what's some of the critical pieces to the systemic oppression thing that you guys have your hands on from both your perspectives?
So it's interesting when I think about, now that I've lived in the Hartford area for the last 26 years, when I moved here, I did not expect to be here this long.
Wow.
But, as life happens, as they say, you make plans and God laughs. It's given me the vantage point to really kind of get an understanding of what happens here. And I think that this is where, David's work is so important, because I can see over time how deeply embedded the cycle of poverty is in this area.
Wow.
Some of our young people, particularly when I think about when I worked for Inroads, when we would go out to high schools into the community and recruit students. There were points in time when I was at Stop and Shop and I was recruiting students, or we would go through the McDonald's drive-thru. We used to laugh all the time. People were like, aren't you that person that works for Inroads? People knew us, right? Because we began to take students, provide them with opportunities in corporate America that, a lot of students will come downtown Hartford and they see these big buildings and they have no idea what happens in them.
None,
and yet
zero.
These buildings are engaged in, sort of the systemic process around, investment and they control ultimately what happens in the communities that our young people live in. And so then these young people started interning in these spaces. And now, I'm looking at young people who, and unfortunately one who we just lost last week, who was one of my Inroads interns, who interned at Fleet Bank, who I recruited in Middletown.
Sorry to hear that.
And 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 so I look at him and his peers and how they were able to transform what even their families thought could be for them, what they certainly thought for themselves could be their limitations, and are now really game changers, have, really
The change
accessed.
makers.
Absolutely. They've
Right.
accessed places and decision making in our community that really will change the game for those who will come behind them. And so I think about, young people, one that comes to mind in particular, who I recruited at Weaver High School, who, when she would do her internship at Fleet Bank at 777 Main, oftentimes there was a family member who would meet her down there talking about, did you get your check yet? Mommy needs, I need to go down to and pay this and pay that.
Mm-hmm.
And they always felt so, responsible for family. But at the same
Burden.
time, I'm like, sis,
Yeah, that
I'm gonna
burden.
need you to let her do what she needs to do, because ultimately down the road, it will impact your family in a different way. So how we change mindsets about what it means to, to learn and understand a process. It's not about you selling out. It's about understanding how it works. We see so many young people now who are entrepreneurs taking some of that skill that they learned to be able to translate it into jobs and opportunities for folks in their own community. And so all of that is a part of how you learn the system. I've always said there's a place for all of us, right? Some of us are going to be entrepreneurs. Some of us need to be embedded in those spaces that allow for us to take advantage of the resources that
But you
these
have to
major
learn the system.
corporations have. But you have to learn the
Mm-hmm.
system. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not for everyone, right? Everyone is not
Absolutely.
that person who sits at the corporate table. I fully recognize that. When I sat at those tables, and I'm sure David would say the same thing, I felt an extreme responsibility. You did almost carry the community in with you, right? To ensure
For sure.
that I was paying attention, that I was listening, and that I was taking and learning what I could so that others could be there, that I wasn't going to always be the only one at that table. That's
Absolutely.
really what it was about for me in terms of breaking down systemic barriers. How do I make sure that there are more people here the next time? And that when I go, it's not like, man, there went our only Black employee, but that there's 25 more who also understand the responsibility that we have to bring each other along. So to me, it's, you got to learn it, to get in it, to be able to impact it, and then recognize the role that we each play in being able to change the game.
Understood. Love that. Love that. David, go ahead. Same thing.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love that answer.
No, I do too. And I was just going to add really quickly, though, Joelle, that one of the things that I think in my role in the Urban League and what the Urban League looks to do is to remind people that the conditions that folks are living in are systemic, right? They are structural, and it's not an event or a circumstance. And I think more times than not, the majority community tends to look at things that we akin to racial practices, racism, racialized processes, and think that we're overstating them because they look at it as a one-off. Someone experienced something at a grocery store, not realizing that experience came from privilege, from presumption, from entitlement, and was on the opposite side formed by generations of modified behaviors to figure out how to live and exist, and then navigate your way to a path. Most of us, when we were kids, we were told by our grandparents, "You'll be the first Black president," right? Or you'll be a doctor or a lawyer. we had 3 jobs to go for, right? And then over time, things happen. You see a friend, fall off. You see this happen, that thing, and then before you know it, you're starting to say, okay, well, maybe that's not for me, and maybe I can't do that. And then you figure out, something. Well, I'll just be a nurse, where my mother was. I mean, things like that happen all along because of systemic racism, and one of the things that I think is even more critical or important.
I'm taking down notes, so don't think I ain't paying. This is good stuff.
But one of the debates that you talk about now with critical race theory is critical race theory and proposes or suggests that that the society is built through a racial lens. And so laws were formed by people who had the authority and power and the motivation to create laws to preserve what they felt entitled to. And so at every turn, when there was a movement or an adjustment to equality, you see retaliation and a counterpoint in laws. And when we talk about social justice, it's not just the legal laws, it's the social laws, the way that people behave in society. And that's why we need social justice, because even if the law says this is not true, people still behave that way. And now we have this, systemic systemic protocols in society. And so, when we look up, it's important for us to establish and remind people that absolutely there's a need to break down these things and recall things for people. That's what the point of Black History Month. That's what the point of Kwanzaa. That's what even the point of MLK Day is. It's to remind people of the importance and the critical nature of breaking down these systems. So, you think about, I just recently heard a comment about reparations, and the point was that when slavery was at its beginning to be ended, the first populace to be liberated were in Washington, D.C. But Abraham Lincoln made it that slave owners received $300 per slave who was emancipated. This was news to me, so probably you know this already.
Oh no, it's true.
But I didn't know that. So the reparations weren't paid to the people who had been deprived and excluded and oppressed. It was given to the people who already had privilege, and to say, sorry, you're going to lose this economic.
Right. We're arguing about reparations. They were already paid out.
Yeah, they were paid out. They were paid to other people, right? So,
that's right.
So I mean, like, these are the ways that things that we are behaving and we're practicing, that we see it being practiced. That's where it's coming from, and so it's absolutely important for us to understand that there's a systemic component to it that needs to be overcome and taken down.
Absolutely, and there's some key parts to some stuff that you said, and the idea of learning the system, then setting the stage for other people to come in those same doors that you both walked through, and then recognizing how the system impacts people's everyday lives to the point where someone may be on that path, just like Joelle or you, who wanted to be the lawyer or the president, CEO, but because there was so many systemic barriers, they say, you know what, I'll just go to nursing school or whatever, and just give up on stuff. So being able to set the stage and realizing that there's motives to this system staying in place. So I appreciate both of you for saying that. Joelle?
Yeah, no, I was going to say absolutely. I remember mentoring a group of middle school students years ago when I was living in Middletown. And I distinctly remember this young lady saying, I want to be a CNA because I'm not cleaning it up behind anybody. And I was like, sis, no, actually, the CNAs are the ones who clean up. I was like, why wouldn't you want to be a doctor or a nurse? Right. But that's not what they saw. So, I talked about Hartford and students not seeing really models of people who look like them or knowing what was happening in these buildings. But when I think about a town like Middletown, so some of our surrounding towns where there's not as much of a sort of a professional community that's as visible, those young people saw, largely their family members who worked in, in sort of, CNA or, really, challenging, requiring lots of hours in order to make, a little bit of something to be able to. And so they were very proud of their family members, right? And they should be, because they have some letters. They went and got the certification. But I'm like, that's not all you can be. Right. And you kind of have it wrong, because they are the ones that you're cleaning up. Right. So how do we make sure that there is not a barrier to the possibility of our young people, right? And that they don't only believe what they see, which is so hard with social media right now. Like, you would think that now with all the access that we have to so many things, that the possibilities would be endless for our young people. But in fact, it's actually somewhat gone the other way, because they see images of people who they've decided are the gold standard sort of in our community, but are not necessarily realistic for them. There's five, there is one LeBron James, there's one Megan Thee Stallion. Like, that's not going to be all of you. So what do you have to contribute? What are the skills that you have that you can lend to this community to begin to help it to develop and grow and that sort of thing?
And then before the next point, Dana, I will say this too, Joe, about that point, is that one of the things that has struck me here, and I don't want to minimize it, I just want to say that it took me to another thought pattern, and that is around mental health and the ability to build stamina or endurance and have this resiliency in your bag, so to speak. There's a clinical perspective of this that I'm not addressing. I'm just saying that when I talk to my kids, I say, everything that we're trying to tell you guys, so you can not check out after high school, not check out after 1 year of college, not check out after graduation, because you have to have this ability to endure all these things that we talked about. For better or worse, they are there and they're not going away. And somehow you have to persist and get through them and onto the other side, if you will, to realize some of the opportunities that are there for you and for your children.
So let me ask this question, because I kind of like what this has kind of turned into, because that's part of the conversation around how the system and how in the systemic oppression piece, how it creates some of that force. And you folks are in pretty good positions and pretty good seats right now. What was some of the hard stuff? Like, both of you talked about, even from being a parent and you work with younger kids and dealing with their mindset. Like, what's some of the hardest parts about this work, dealing with systemic oppression, whether it's dealing with young folks, older folks, whether the trauma you see because of mental health or whatever, like, and again, tie it to systemic oppression, because there's so much talk about mental health. There's so much talk about social media, but people forget that the underlying theme to a lot of this stuff is this systemic oppression. So tie it to what's been really, really, really ridiculously hard doing this work that you've seen kind of, peek into these other areas as it relates to systemic oppression. And just take people through, because again, you folks sit in some pretty good seats. You've done a lot of the work. You've been a lot of places. Take people through. I'm gonna have David go first this time. Take people through some of the tough stuff that has been hard about getting some of this stuff done, so we don't lose our young people and our daughters and sons and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think the most painful reality of it, I heard someone say it again. I hear things said to me, and then they are said within one context that may throw me off a bit, or that I will hear it and apply it another way. And the first thing I remember, one thing that sticks out for me is nobody cares. Again, on the mental health side, that's the last thing you want to say.
Some hopelessness.
Right. But on the other side, it's like, get in line. You are one of many. Everybody's got to go through something, whatever that thing is. And more importantly, I have people that I talk to or work with, whatever, and I say, when you turn 18, people expect you to do what 18-year-old high school graduates are going to be doing. They don't expect you to be doing what 14-year-olds are doing. When you're 25, there's a clock that is a subconscious clock in people's mind what you can or should be doing. And if you're not there, whatever the explanation or excuses, nobody cares. This is what they expect to see you as. And that is a harsh reality that I think I have taken in here recently, right, when I heard it. And I say that because in the work that we do at the Urban League, I say this to people that we tend to, the Urban League, people say, well, what does the Urban League do? Or is the Urban League still relevant? What are y'all doing on it? And I say, absolutely, because this is what happens. Most of the organizations that are serving Black Americans in the way that corporate America or funders or people rally around are not Black led, owned, operated institutions. With all due respect, Boys and Girls Club, for example. Somebody told me a long time ago, people love babies and puppies, right? So if you sell them babies and puppies, they giving you money, right? We, I say, are dealing with Rottweilers and, junkyard dogs and stuff, because we got people who are, adults who don't have their high school diploma, we're helping get their GED. We have people who have been displaced for whatever reason or another, trying to find work. We have people who are trying to get promoted, who have had challenges in their careers. We have people who have been, again, challenged with affordable housing and things like that. And again, when I talk about this time clock, people are like, hey, you're a grown person. Why should I be helping you? They want to help the babies that don't have it. So some of the challenges that we have is just trying to compel people to realize that need is there, and that need only exists. And this is the other challenge that many times, enough times, I've been in conversation, and sometimes you can be talking to people of color, and they'll talk about it as if Black people are the reason for their problem, the reason they are in these situations. But it's not. It's a systemic problem, something that has been orchestrated over these years, going back again. Now we can literally say 400. It's been 400 now. We've been saying 400 for a long time.
With motivation.
It has been orchestrated, right? And so people aren't crazy. Like when that new meme that says, parents, you aren't crazy, your kids are throwing your forks in the trash. Like Black people, y'all ain't crazy. People are really taking your aspirations and every move you make, and they are counterpunching that and pushing it back. And so the challenge is making people realize that as the organization of the Urban League, that's who we are fighting for, and that's why we need support, and that's why we need help. And then people look at us and say, well, yeah, you're part of the problem. And then the other thing is that even when people are having success, and that's why we tend to say more times than not that the Urban League mission is to serve Black Americans, not low income, underserved, or whatever, is because Black people, whatever role they are probably underpaid, undervalued, underutilized. And so they need to be promoted and supported as well. So what we're doing is trying to make the reality come across to people in all spaces that Black people are part of this thing, that are on the, are the oppressed, right? And you really need to understand that even those who are doing well probably should be doing better. Whenever you hear people talk about that, I'll shut up here in a second, Joelle, but I remember when John Lewis passed away, and the person who is the senior person in the Senate for the Republicans, his name fails me now, but he started off his speech for John Lewis with this eloquence about how John Lewis grew up in a shotgun house in Georgia, and he was so poor. I was like, that ain't, what are you talking about? That is not a glorified story. That's awful. Nobody should have to live like that. And some people will say, well, try to, create a false equivalence to their humble beginnings. But their humble beginnings weren't because they were because of their race. Our humble beginnings were because of our race. And so you hear these athletes, whatever, and this athlete, he grew up, like I just told my story, right? I grew up a single mother, teenage mother. That shouldn't be the case, and it shouldn't be a part of a glorification of something. It's awful, and that's what we need to kind of overcome.
And what I heard was the theme throughout what you were saying is that the system is so subtle for most people, Black and white, and we don't even realize. So when we actually are trying to support people who need housing, financing, and they only want to give money to the babies, they don't realize that the mother is the person who's struggling the most. And when you give money to the mom or dad, then even Black folks say, why are you giving it to them? Because the system is so subtle. And it's just, it's so pervasive and crazy. So I thank you for sharing that. So Joelle, same question. Like what's the hard part about doing this systemic work and getting people, to realize that they're thirsty and we got water for them? Like,
it's interesting because it takes me all the way back when I think about when I was growing up, and then what I ultimately wrote my thesis on in college around, the role of segregation and then the role of desegregation. And how, here in Connecticut, and I talk to students when I teach about this all the time, we live in extremely racially and socioeconomically stratified communities across the state. And so the reality, when you think about, for me, when I think about what was hard, is I think about the notion that the moment that I step into the room, and David and you, Dana, as well, right? Before you've had a moment to tell your story, folks have already decided what your story is.
Absolutely.
And they then are oftentimes shocked to know that perhaps what they assumed your story to be is not actually your story at all.
At all.
And so I think what happens is, and one of the benefits of what has come after the death of George Floyd is this sort of awareness for institutions to say, hey, like, we need to be thinking about this, and we need to make sure that there's opportunities for education for our staff. And why is that important that corporations in particular are doing that? Because these are the people that you live next door to, right? In some instances, or they live in the towns. And we talk about downtown Hartford at 6 o'clock, before the pandemic, when everyone worked downtown at 6 o'clock, all those suburban buses came in and folks were, Simsbury, Southland, they're gone, right? Gone. So those folks mostly only interact with people that they work with that are different from them because they don't live with them. We used to talk about all the time, these folks grew up in a certain town. I won't name a town. And they went to school with people from that town, and then they graduated from high school, and then they went off to a college that had people made up of people that were just like the one in the town they went to. And then they graduated from college, and somebody who was their neighbor or their friend got them a job at this company where all the other people in their neighborhood worked at. And then they went back and they bought a home around the corner from where their parents, home was and where they grew up. And then they drive into work into these corporations, and they pull into the garage, and they go up into the buildings, and they connect with all the people that they've grown up with and they've always known. And at the end of the day, they go back downstairs, they get in their car, and they drive back home. They have absolutely no connection with anybody who's different from them, racially, religiously, culturally, right? Ethnically, you name it. And so really the only time that they have an opportunity to even begin to learn about people who are different from them is really what, corporations have been working with firms like mine and others to bring in individuals to talk about what is this thing that we mean when we're talking about diversity, and how does that impact our decision making? How does the bias that we've learned by virtue of either our families trying to protect us, or don't go to that neighborhood, or don't live here, or realtors steering you to live in certain communities, how does that impact the decisions that you make in your business? Who you're going to hire, who you tap to give a presentation, who, oftentimes folks who are like you, we talk about similarity bias. You're like, oh yeah, they're like me, they can do it. You may have no proof of their capability, expertise, or what have you, but because they look like you, maybe they went to your same school or what have you, they're like, yeah, I'm going to. Now you have every degree, more degrees than you need to have, right? Because that's what we do. We overcompensate. We have 1,000 degrees. We don't even need them. Now we're in debt because we've taken all these different certifications and classes and degrees. And
more
folks
degrees
are still
than
like,
a thermometer is what my mother would say.
Absolutely.
More degrees than a thermometer.
And folks are still looking at you like, I don't know, he's not really a fit. Because you're not like them, and they don't know anybody like you. They have no proximity to people who are like you. So anyone they meet who is like any of us is like an anomaly. Oh man, David, he's a good guy. That's a good guy there, right? But they're not thinking about you when they're making those decisions, when they're sitting at the table. That was clearly the hardest thing. I mean, particularly as a Black woman who is, short in stature. When I was in those rooms, there were oftentimes people would say like, oh, wow, how does it feel to be the only Black person in the room? Well, you know what? That happens to me so frequently. Honestly, I wasn't even paying attention to it.
Didn't even know, right?
Or I'll open my mouth and speak. And most of us who are in a professional capacity can, share this, right? You open your mouth and speak, and oh my gosh, she speaks so well. She's so articulate. What exactly did you expect that I was going to sound like? Right. And those are the things, the microaggressions that we encounter all the time. It does not matter what level of education you have, what neighborhood you live in, what car you drive. When folks have decided who they think you are, that is how they treat you. Absolutely. That is the biggest obstacle that we still have to face as we look at, particularly individuals employed who get to, a certain level and are at plateaus, but clearly capable of making it to the next level. But the decision makers are hampered by bias that has always advantaged them. So why would they change now?
Absolutely.
That is to me, the single biggest obstacle. And that's about hearts and minds and individual people's relationships, one person at a time. Right? You can do all the workshops you want. And trust me, we do them. So it is critically important. But at the same time, it's about those proximate relationships that we have with people that really change the way you think about and how you begin to incorporate people who are different from you into the mix by far and away.
And I think that's some of the tough stuff that folks do have to uncover. That the unfortunate part is a lot of it turns into changing the hearts and minds of people, which is just a long and timely path. And that's why we have league, professionals in Urban League and in your agency and doing what you're doing also. But you said something that was pretty powerful. And it was mind blowing to me. Again, being a transplant into Connecticut also, I always wondered, like 6:00 p.m., Hartford turns into a ghost town. And I never connected it to race until you just said what you said. Because all of these folks, they come in and they work in these tall buildings, and Hartford's booming between 8 and 6. And by 7 p.m., there's tumbleweeds going down Main Street. And I never understood why until you just said what you said. And that was mind blowing, man.
But it's systemic, right? When you think about it, right? Those buses are scheduled at certain times to get you in and out. It's just like, quite frankly, with the open choice program with, some of the students, the challenges students would have is that they bust out to a school and then they can't participate. They couldn't, this was, years
they
ago.
Got to get back home.
Because they have to get back home. So the buses were poised to get you back, so that you weren't there. It was almost like, they talked about the sundown laws, that we know about from this. It's honestly a very similar process, right? That is systemically built into how we function as a society. You don't even have to put up a sign. That's the de jure segregation, right? De facto was when it was on the books. Like we had signs up and everything. Nowadays, you don't even need signs because our behaviors have integrated that into how we perform. So
wow, there you go. Well, you know what? I got one last question. We're going to end this on a positive note. You folks have been amazing. This thing went way deeper than these questions will ever get us. So I appreciate the two of you so much. Let's talk about if and when we get there. And I'm going to say when we get there, what does that look like? Like what's the end goal for you and your agency, Joelle, and you, David, with the Urban League? Like, what's an end goal? What does it look like? What does it feel like that says, wow, we've made some great strides, some great inroads. We've done the do. Whoever wants to go first, go first.
Yeah, I think Joelle should close it out. So I think one of the things that I also thought as Joelle was speaking about two things that she mentioned is that if there's anything that I think I have had the privilege of experiencing, I hear it in Joelle, is that we've come to a place of being closer to our authentic selves. And if you could be your authentic self in your workspace, of course, in your living space and where and your recreational space, I think you've achieved one of the highest levels of self determination that we can achieve. And so the challenge, though, is that, as Joelle was saying, that when you look at what the generations of people are looking at as their things to strive for and aspirations and, the TikTok or whatever it is, things like that. But while on one level, some of us in my generation might not see that as a career path, so to speak, what it is doing, though, is allowing people in these generations to come to realize that there is an authentic self that they can pursue and they don't have to subscribe to what has been in place for years. And they are willing to, they've already built into their model that they're going to live accordingly. And granted, they want to shoot their shot and make $1 million doing it, but they're okay with not making $1 million and still, living at some level. It may be, on their parents' couch, but just the same. The point here is that there's an authentic self that I think has to be pursued. So one of the things that we want to do is, you hear the term, if there's no seat at the table, bring a chair. If there's no room at the table, make room. or or if there's not enough, make the pie bigger, all those kind of things. And I think
Or build a table.
Build a table. I think all of those things are making us think otherwise, and saying we don't need that, or we don't need them. And that's one thing that I think is something that gives us more hope, and is causing us to think more strategically and dynamically about, and more inclusively. Because again, I'm not one who subscribes to telling my kids, is too deep and personal, but I'm talking like, hey, when if cops pull you over or whatever, don't say nothing. No, say something. I don't know. That's how I am. So my kids may not make it home. I'm just saying I don't teach them to cow and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm saying that, with the means to get to our end, it is saying to yourself, if there's no other solution, if there is no solution, what can I do? Like if Superman isn't coming, if there's no whatever, what can I do? And that's when we start thinking creatively and inclusively. And what I really wanted to get to before is that means that the Olympics, whatever wrong it is, have breakdancing. Right? Like, they have breakdancing. And breakdancing was created by Black Americans, 40 years ago, right? So,
former B-boy right here, yes.
I'll start beatboxing, but stop. So, but I'm saying though, right? Like there's, but to be inclusive and to assume the level of privilege or entitlement or doability or whatever you want to call it, is to say that if breakdancing can be accepted now, it could have been accepted then, or if it wasn't accepted then, what is the thing today that we are saying to ourselves, there's no place, oh wow, it should be monetized, oh wow, how can we do this? Like what is it that we can do today to start behaving that way ourselves? And to me, that is going to create a more inclusive approach to making this world more equitable, because the equity means that I was at an event once and the speaker got up and they said hello, and then they said hello in like 5 different languages. Everybody's like, oh, this is great. And I was like, that's not diversity when you think it is. Diversity is being say hello the way you say it and it being okay. Not that you got to do what everybody else do something that everybody else can hear. And no, if I do it my way is okay, right? And however it gets informed, however it comes out, it's okay. It's not because I need to do it and change the way that I do it or assimilate. Sociology says that you can either change it, adapt to it, remove yourself, or be removed. Right? That's what happens, right? And we're talking about MLK. Unfortunately, he was removed involuntarily, right? So what can we do? How can we change it? And if we can't, remove ourselves and create something bigger and better for us, by us, that kind of thing. So, I don't know that we'll ever see, this place where we're all walking together, holding hands. I think there's always going to be some differentiator, but I think in that differentiation or along the way, we are learning now how to value people and their authentic selves, and people are embracing their authentic selves, and that enough is a good starting point.
Right, and I hear what you're saying. Like, there's so much disruption right now, and excuse the ringing phone. Let that finish. There's so much disruption right now because of things like social media and because things are being accepted into norms, that we have a chance to disrupt the systems in a way that we had never even seen before. So absolutely, I think that's definitely where we can go. All right, listen, David said we're going to end with Joelle, so let's hear it. Give us some good news. What's the outlook? Let's go. No pressure.
Right. I think, we talk about generations, when we talk about, what our opportunity is moving forward, I think all of us have the ability to unlearn some of the things that we unfortunately have been socialized with. We talked about, David shared definition around diversity. one of the things about equity is being comfortable recognizing that everybody doesn't need the same thing. You know, as a nation, we've talked about equality a lot. Like we want the same thing that they have, right? Because that's all that we knew, right? We want what they have. But sometimes we don't need the same things that they have. Sometimes we need different things than they have, right? Because when you think about where we're starting from, right? Or what we have access to, and you talk about, you know, generational wealth. My family moved. We did the typical, like my mom grew up in Brooklyn, then they moved out to, you know, Queens, and moved on because that's what you did, right? Like you just, you know, you did the eastward version of moving on up instead of to a deluxe apartment in the sky, right?
Yeah,
But
Long Island was bougie for us. Yes, absolutely.
yeah, you know, and we were close to Queens though. But you know, do we still own that brownstone in Brooklyn? Nope. Because then it was, you know, what you were taught was you're supposed to move on up. You just go and get the next thing, you know, whereas we see, you know, some of our counterparts whose families have owned property for a very long time. They have the ability to transfer those assets to generations such that there's no one who will ever be homeless, right? You may not want to live on Scarborough Street in Hartford, but your family owns that home, right? So I think we have to really unlearn some of the things that we have learned that told us that we made it. And recognize that, you know, it's not always about the same things, but about needing what we actually need. You know, it hurts my heart every single time I see somebody do a GoFundMe. Like, I'm like, listen, our predecessors, you know, because my grandparents talk about this all the time. The insurance man came to the door to collect the money. They never saw those premiums realized, right? Now we have some safeguards around that. So if we're paying some money into it, we're going to get it out, right? There are tons of organizations that are offering grants to small business owners, to, you know, particularly women-owned businesses and what have you. We're watching people who pass away, and it's like, oh, you know, we didn't even think about this. Not someone who passes and, you know, and it's unexpected, but folks who, you know, folks' mamas and daddies, and it's like GoFundMe. And I'm like, okay, we have got to get to a point where we recognize. One of my best friend's niece is starting a new job next week. I told her, when you get there to HR, call me, because I want to make sure that you sign up for long-term care, short-term disability, everything they have, because you're 27. That stuff costs like $1 a pay period, right? You want that. You need that.
Now.
We don't even, you know, our folks are like, oh, I don't want that. I want all my money in my check. No, you do need that. You need all of those things, right? So being better prepared and educating one another about the things that we didn't necessarily grow up knowing, that our parents couldn't have provided us because they didn't work in the settings that we work in, but taking full advantage of what is offered to us so that we then can make the investments that allow us to have some sustainable generational wealth, right? And I'm not a big investment person. I should do way better than I do. It's just not my thing. But I'm going to outsource it to somebody that I trust, that I know, to do it, because I know that I should be, right? So I think some of it is unlearning what we always thought was that's the way to make it. That's how we have to do it.
Absolutely.
And it also means being much more intentional about supporting one another. One of the things I love about, as much as I talk about, oh, I never plan to be in Connecticut as long as I've been here. I don't think this is my final resting place. I'm getting out of here, you know, all of that, right? I still do it. But one of the things I love about this community is that we can point to individuals who we know, who run organizations,
Absolutely,
who are positioned in things, whether it be nonprofit or for-profit, you know, that I can say, I know the president of this college, or that I know the person who is the CEO of this nonprofit. I couldn't necessarily say that. My parents couldn't necessarily say that when I was growing up. But I tell my kids all the time, and I actually have 4 children too, which is kind of funny, 3 girls and a boy. All the time, do not discount those connections that we now have. Don't be like, oh, my mother said, my father. No, because that's how we've watched other communities be successful and thrive. So we have to unlearn those behaviors that told us that we had to behave differently in order to make it. Because we all need to make it in order for things to change, every single one of us. And so that's the thing that I think is really most important. We have to unlearn and recognize that there are things we need to do differently in order to see our community grow.
Absolutely. So folks, listen, I've had you for some time now. I'm going to let you both go, but I want to thank you so much. This has been a phenomenal conversation. I'm going to rewatch this thing. It's going to air for the rest of our CRECs during February, during Black History Month. But I want to personally thank the two of you for giving me this opportunity to meet you and hear from you and hear your stories. And also on behalf of our CREC community, thank you again for everything that you said and what you shared. Very deep thoughts and stuff like that. I really do appreciate that. So thank you so much and enjoy your weekend, both of you. I look forward to our next conversation, and we're gonna connect some of these other dots off this Zoom also, because you guys said some deep stuff. So folks, you take care, have a great weekend, and thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much. You too.
Thank you, man.
All right.
Take care.
Take care, Joelle.